Hi, Gina. Welcome to the Life with Love podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. Um, I'll start by saying, so you're the founder of Centripetal Force Studio and a physical and energy therapist. So let's start from the beginning. What does that mean exactly to be a physical and energy therapist?
Well, I started off as a physical therapist nearly 20 years ago and learned about the body and muscles and bones and how, can have shoulder pain and back pain. And then from there, I noticed that people were going through things in their lives. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Like after a relationship breakup or they lost someone important in their life, like they had shoulder pain, back pain, knee pain, just different types of milestones in their lives. And then I saw that there was an emotional component. And then I understood that energy is emotions in motion. And so it's just that we have to move this current through our body. And I kind of put them together, and it's told a beautiful story for nearly 2 decades.
I find this fascinating so because through like your work and I know there's like some books out there on it, but I find it fascinating that yeah, we don't necessarily put this together all the time that the physical sensations we're feeling in our body might have to do with emotional stuff going on. And so, from my perspective, so like, I talk to people on this podcast about how can we have more loving relationships and how can we do better in relationships and be a better partner and spouse and parent and all that. And so this might seem kind of random, but I feel like it's super connected, that it's actually super connected to what this is all about. Because can you kind of explain then, um, when we have that like unsettling feeling in our tummy or like we get that gut feeling, there's really something to that, right?
Absolutely. When we think about relationships, it could be a relationship with our boss and this gut feeling, and we don't like going to work, or we're really lethargic and tired, and we just think like I'm, just off this week. But if we really start to look at it, it could be the way our boss talks to us and the tone of their voice, and we're not feeling heard. This can remind us of our childhood and the way our parents talked to us and made us feel. And, that's just going to be in the different dynamics in the home. But there is a relationship and a connection there. And then anxiety can develop in the stomach and the solar plexus region or in the chest. And we have issues breathing. And we just kind of think of these as signs and symptoms, but not really messages that our body is trying to convey to us that we need some conscious decision making, some choices. Perhaps we need to look at where we're at in our job. Maybe we need to switch positions, or maybe we just need to, you know, remove ourselves from that career. Who knows? There has to be some kind of change. That's what I've seen, that we need to get a better hold of understanding what our body is trying to tell us.
And are there certain things, so like say, you are in a relationship and is there like a certain emotion that is connected that are connected to certain body parts or certain things to look out for?
Yeah, if we look at Chinese medicine, the lungs are connected to grief. And so there can be sadness in there. And perhaps we just had a breakup, or we're going through a divorce, or the relationship was long over before it's actually physically over. We can have that heartache feeling. The heart is a muscle, it can feel sore, and then it could radiate to the middle back. And then it feels like it's upper mid back pain. That's what I've seen a lot as a physical therapist, like just how spinal pain was really emotional pain. And then I became curious and started asking questions like, what had they gone through? And I'm just looking for something. What was it that actually changed everything? And there's always something. There's just always something.
Yeah, and I think next month, June is I want to say National Scoliosis Month, I think. And
Oh,
so I think so. And so as we're heading into that, I was thinking, I've had scoliosis most of my life. And um, and so as we're kind of thinking about that, I mean, there's a
mhm.
emotional stuff there, right? That's what
Yes,
I'm
yes,
learning.
totally. Yes. I actually wrote a really cool thesis on this for a matrix repatterning course that I took. And I kind of looked deeper into it because I've had a little bit of scoliosis myself, trying to correct it, reverse it. And of course, I've had patients as well. And what I've noticed is that it's a twisted heart. What it feels like is if we had both arms out to the side and we're being pulled right in one direction, because that's kind of what's happening is we're being pulled in one area, the shoulders are off from the hips, basically. So one side gets shortened, the other side's longer. And typically in the rib cage, one side is kind of more expanded and the other side is more collapsed, depending on which side. It can also be front to back, but typically it's in those two areas. And so the area of the ribs on the right side is the liver, which the core emotion is anger. On the left side of the ribs is more of the spleen, kind of stomach region, and pancreas area, and that's more worry. So it's kind of like we look at like, are we a worried child or are we in harboring anger inside? And a lot of times what I've seen in that pattern is being pulled, our twisted heart is pulled between two parents. Perhaps we went through a divorce or there's, domestic tension in the house and we're that kid that's like has the big heart, but we're being pulled in two different directions and we could be between worry and anger. And it ends up causing pain and we get kind of stunted in our growth and we need to, we need to grow more.
And yeah, so like, so if we're like, is it always related? Like, say we do have like some soreness in our shoulders or, like knee pain or whatever. Could it ever be that it is just knee pain or is everything
Yes.
always yeah?
Mhm. Yeah, no, in a perfect world, I would love to think that it's always something, but you know, most of the time when people come to see me, it's like it's the knee pain that's been there for at least a year, usually two or three. They have gone to actually traditional physical therapy. They have even had surgery. The pain medicine's not working anymore, or they've had injections, or they're trying to avoid surgery, but it's just this like persistent pain that won't go away. And that's when I start to look at that's where my work comes in is like the emotional stuff. But I mean, sometimes you can look at it because the knee represents being having the ability to bend. It's where our ego is, and people get really stiff and they just don't want to bend on anything. And so I don't know, the knee can talk to us a little bit, and it's a lot easier to look at it and be like, why am I so inflexible? Like, where does this come from? And pay attention to it, try to make a change around it, and then the body goes back into a flow state. So it's easier than to like deal with all that pain. But
Yeah, for sure. And so, like, I guess what's so when somebody comes into your office, because say there's somebody listening right now that's like, oh, yeah, like my back hurts or whatever. So, what are the steps? Like, what does somebody do in this case? Like, what sort of the process look like in your mind?
the process looks like there's major space in between believing that this could be emotional. They're like,
Mm.
no, like when I, lift my suitcase when I'm traveling, my back hurts. Or, after I go for a long walk, that's when my back hurts. Like it feels physical. It makes sense to us that after we do physical things, we would have muscle tension and pain. And we feel that. Like, how could it be because I'm stressed about money all the time, or which is kind of what that represents, or I'm just lacking support in my life where I need somebody to kind of help me feel supported in major decisions or whatever it might be. It's it's really helping them to understand that. So what I do is go through a track of a sequence of events. So I'm looking at like where is their life, what has happened, and I'm looking at the timeline and then looking at when the pain started. And honestly, like once you do that, it's just not too far off. And then it becomes this place of like getting them to believe it and thinking, oh my goodness, can emotional pain manifest as physical pain? Yes. Yes, it causes muscle tension from deeper roots of our autonomic nervous system. So it's how everything automatic in our body. So the heart, um, heartbeat, breathing rate, gut tension, anything like that, when your body gets stressed repetitively, it can start to cause muscle tension. It goes into certain areas, I believe, to kind of give us some clues and help us understand how to find some resolution. But
Yeah. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe in this. I'm a big believer in this. I really am. And, you know, I just wonder, like, so when people, so like, what are the steps to kind of like going through, getting, so kind of ridding of it? Is it just sitting there and like thinking of your pain and like crying through it? Like, what do you have to do to kind of let it
yeah,
subside?
interesting that you say cry because what happens is, we talk about it first, we go through the sequence of events, and then I'll do some body work. So then I might go into that mid back region and I'm starting to work on that area. And, research shows that the fascia in our body, which is like the casing around the muscles and this tissue, it holds memory. So I'll kind of get in there, and all of a sudden, like memories start to pop up around this particular thing that's happened in their life. And they may get emotional. I can see tears in their eyes and they're holding it back. I'm like, oh, you don't have to hold it back. It's okay. And so when that emotion comes through, it's kind of what's been waiting to be expressed. It's just holding itself in the body. It's this container, which our body is the subconscious mind. It's all of our beliefs, everything we've ever been through. It's holding itself in there until it's the perfect time for us to release it. And typically it's on my table, and this is the work that I do, and this is what they're coming for. And so then as the emotion is expressed, it's almost like now they can feel the pain. Now here comes the pain even more, or they felt a pain that was previous to that pain, or it jumps around and goes to a different pain. And then now it's almost like someone's turned the volume up on their body of what they can feel. And now everything's coming. And now we can do all the physical modalities. So now we can do acupuncture, we can do physical therapy, we can go move, we can stretch, and we can get to it instead of all of that harbored emotion that's just sitting there waiting to be found.
Yeah. And if so, I mean, you're in California, right?
I am. Yeah, LA
So
area.
in the LA area. So like, so let's say if somebody isn't in that area, like, is there stuff we could do like on our own or at home that we could do to kind of like work on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Do a timeline. Just write down, I always do from sometimes you can even start in utero. If you know your birth story, because sometimes things can go as far as that, like what was happening with you when you were inside mom and what was happening around, because sometimes that birth story can have major clues into our life. And just write down impactful moments in your life, significant things that have happened possibly to you or to your family, or things that have just really had an impact on you. And then on the other side of that, just write signs and symptoms, whether it's pain, whether you got a certain diagnosis, where you in an accident of some kind, whatever it might be, just do a timeline and start to put those pieces together. And then you can start to write about it. So you could say, do a journal entry around if your pain had a voice, what would it say? Sometimes that's really difficult for people to be able to kind of click into that. Like, how does my body talk? And so now you're like clicking into that deep inner voice and that intuition. And when we just sit with it, close your eyes, just breathe and kind of just sit with it. That's the hardest part for people to do. They usually want to run away from it, or they don't want to sit in it. It's really uncomfortable. Perhaps this is when the anxiety comes, which is usually what it is. We got to move that out of the way to get down to the pain. And then here it comes. So I always suggest that. And once you can connect with it, then it's easier to access and heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, um, I guess when it comes to relationships, and really, I guess it could be for anything, whether it's a romantic relationship or with a family member or a coworker, but like, what are some of the signs and symptoms that are like, okay, this is just not working. Like, this is not for me. Like, I'm sure we probably intuitively know, but maybe just lay it out just in case.
For in relationships, you're talking about?
Hmm.
Yeah. You know, um, Autoimmune disorders seem to be the huge one. That's like the big one that's going on where um, we might be people pleasing way too much. This could be a pattern that came about in childhood, and it's just what we learned. It's our love language. It's kind of how we felt loved, so that we just kind of keep doing this pattern. And then we, can please our spouse, and then our kids. We're doing everything for everyone and just depleting ourselves. And we just have nothing, no charge left. We've lost all energy. And so it's creating disease. And that's a huge one, typically in women. Um, Anxiety and depression is always huge, especially in combination, because I think it's spiritual chaos. It's where we're really far away from ourselves and we've lost ourselves. We don't know who we are. And so we need to like pull ourselves out of that relationship or situation to breathe, to kind of connect back to self. Perhaps something happened when we get into a marriage or relationship. It can remind us of old events that are just replaying themselves until we're ready to heal them. And here it is. Oftentimes it's after kids that can happen. And we just need to do some work, and we just might need to have some space in order to do that.
So yeah, like if we're feeling these things, it might be an indication that like the body is saying like, hey, you
Yes.
know, give some
Yes.
attention.
And ultimately, cancer. Cancer is a big one. When someone has cancer in a relationship, they really got to take inventory of where this came from because usually like 75% of the people that have had cancer have had a history of depression for a pretty long time. So again, where is the spirit being dampened? Where have they not been fully able to express? And perhaps there's like this place of growth that needs to happen that didn't happen from leaving the home and meeting somebody new. It was like this space that needed to just kind of learn about themselves and to deal with some traumas that they weren't connected with, whatever that might be. And a lot of times I feel like it's like learning how to say no and drawing these boundaries and then keeping that energy for themselves. I've noticed cancer to be a disease of exhaustion. Just people are tired and those patterns aren't working. So we have to learn how to change patterns. And it's difficult to do that when we're in the pattern. And
Yeah.
so those are the major things that I see.
Yeah. And so like if someone's listening right now, they're like, so like say for example that they are anxious or they're depressed and they're like, well, it's just from my emotions. I mean, is that really at the core what it is? Or there are potentially like other things at play that we have to look at too, right? Or not
Yeah, we
necessarily.
have to look at like what made us anxious. I work with kids and it's kind of just a reflexive pattern that we learned when we were a kid. And perhaps it was somebody in the house that we grew up with and they had nervous and anxious energy and they were always, telling you what to do and, moving around all the time. They never knew how to sit still. And so then it created a fire inside of us. And as a child, we're spinning around and doing the same thing, just not realizing where it all came from and creating this anxiety. And really, what the connection needs to be is who am I? Where is this current coming from? And somebody's sitting with a major gift inside of them that needs to be expressed. True story. I see that all the time. So um, it's just like this current that's running through. I mean, is it your spouse? Maybe, maybe not, but it's definitely worth looking at out of all the players in the game and what's happening here and what is draining me the most and what do I need to make a change about. That is where people get stuck. It might be severing some type of connection or a tie that is really just absolutely taking everything from them. Or it just might be, looking at it the relationship and understanding how I need to make some changes and decisions. It's the law of choice and consequence, right? If I make this choice, the consequences are going to be different. And usually that's what people need to do. And it's just the hardest thing to do, but they got to do it.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that because do you find like with your patients that that's probably one of the top things that there is just so much resistance to kind of looking within and seeing
It is.
ourselves? Yeah.
It it really is that. I give the analogy all the time of it's like a closet, right? It's like our the darkness inside the closet. And I'm just like, okay, you've got your hand on the doorknob, okay? Like you've got it. Like I just need you to just turn your wrist, turn your hand, and just open the door. And like that's 85% of it. I just need you to open it up and I need you to go stand inside for just like 10 seconds. And they're like you can feel that, right? You're just like, oh, like I don't want to. And it's like, I know. But once you get in there and it like hits you a little bit, sure, it's uncomfortable and it's icky, but it will fade. And then you just kind of breathe into it. And then it just gets a little bit easier to handle. And then you can start seeing the light, honestly. But it really is that. It's just the resistance of not wanting to look at any adverse childhood experiences, maybe even bringing up to your partner that, things that they have gone through and that they've gone through it and they're like, you know, spewing it out left and right. And it's like, hey, I need you to go take care of this because this isn't good for us. And just mentioning it because it's having an effect on you. But that's that tension. It's the resistance. And if we think of resistance, it's tension. And so then it
Hmm.
starts pulling at our body and then it starts pulling energy from the body. So
Yeah.
at first we have physical pain, like the muscle aches and the shoulder pains and the neck pains and all that kind of stuff. And then after that, it goes deeper into the systemic um,
Hmm.
issues, bigger diseases.
Yeah. And I think too, so yeah, I mentioned earlier, I've had scoliosis since I don't know, I've been 8 years old, maybe something like that. And it started out do kind of like a lot of physical therapy type stuff. And then the more I started looking into the emotional component, that's helped me so much. In sort of like figuring out my scoliosis and in terms of what you were talking about. And what I find fascinating is, and I don't know how much we think about it, but like that's sort of the way we move in the world is kind of representative of maybe our inner thoughts and feelings, right? Would you want to touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's how we think about ourselves, what we've been taught to believe. And with going back with scoliosis, I've learned so much about that of how it really starts in the inner ear. And so it's our equilibrium. And so our equilibrium could be off because of perhaps the way we were positioned inside of our mother. And we just never got repositioned because babies can really benefit from cranial sacral work, which is moving the cranial bones and helping the lymphatic flow through the body. And a lot of times these the inner ear stuff can lead to earaches
Hmm.
and gut issues. And with just repositioning the cranial bones and moving the body, you open up those pathways and then the bones can fall into place. And it just could be patterning that was just overlooked because we don't think about looking at a 7-year-old child when they wake up one day and one shoulder is higher than the other. And it's like, oh, it's not supposed to be like that. And we just think, oh, they're young. And it's like, no, we can actually straighten it out. My kids were like this. And my daughter actually woke up one day like that. And my son did too. They're really tall. And so it's just like they're like plants, right? Like how the plant like takes a little turn and the pot is too small now for the plant and the plant needs a bigger pot to grow. It's kind of bodies are the same way. And so I just took my kids out to my table, just repositioned the ribs and kind of repositioned the neck and just aligned it all and then just had them breathe into that and then they were fine. But we just don't think about that. That nose needs to align with the center of the chest and align with the belly button and the pubic bone. Like we want to stay in alignment, but that's a lot of emotional tension as well. And these kids could be absorbing this stuff in throughout their ears and in throughout their heart and in throughout their gut. And there tends to be a little bit of a twist in the tissues because we just don't know how to deal with it. And until we get older and we can start to process it. But when you start to put the emotional component together like you are, it seems like the body just melts It
Yeah.
melts into position.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's helped me tremendously. And I would imagine too with kids because they're so young, does that help too? They haven't had as many like emotional experiences, so they're a little more malleable.
Uh, oh yeah, they're
Yeah.
super malleable, and you can just it's just like Gumby. You could just put them right back to, you could bend it and put it right back in place, and then they can move on.
Yeah.
And and kids go through, everyone's different, and kids go through different emotional experiences. And the highly sensitive kids are really attuned to their bodies and they're feeling the anxiety, but they don't know how to express it. And they can just feel panic and worry. And then the parent might just think, like, what is wrong with my child? What's happening? And they just don't understand what they're feeling. And they're absorbing the classroom or this little kid that's sitting next to them in the classroom. And they're, taking this pressure and sensitivity into the gut. And that's where it's twisting things because perhaps they don't even know how to tell their parent that they're feeling this. And
Hmm.
so they're just absorbing all of it until one day they wake up and they're sideways or whatever can happen. But
Yeah. And like when someone comes into your office, can you kind of tell right away, like, because I think universally, like, right, if someone's shoulders are hunched over or they are kind of crooked, like, can you tell right away, ooh, like they're probably dealing with X, Y, and Z? Like, you can tell that.
at this point, yes, I can totally see it. Um, I can really see it when someone is like rounded and there's this energy that's going up into the upper back and they're really they have a major C curve in the back and it tells me that they are holding so much emotion. There is such a body story there and it could be grief because we just realize like all this loss in their life and they don't know how to deal with it or they don't know how to talk and it starts to harden over time. It doesn't get to metabolize into the body and get processed. And then typically we grow from that and we become more wise and then we understand life a little bit more and we flow with life a little bit more. But yeah, when anything traumatic happens to the body takes a blow. So I call it trauma posture. So what I see is the rib cage slides back, the shoulders round forward, and then we lift the head just so we can kind of see where we're going. And the pelvis tucks under as well. So then the back becomes really straight, and then
Mhm.
usually there's back and hip pain. But if we think about like this C curve that's happening in the whole back and like the pelvis is tucked under like a scared dog would be, right? There's got to be fear locked in there. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not asking you, are you fearful? But I'm wondering what experience in your life created a fear response, probably not cognitively, but your body's holding that pattern. So they may not know right away. So that's where I'll go in and do the body work. And I'm trying to release that pattern. And as soon as the muscles can release that pattern, here comes the story.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because, for people who listen to this podcast, they can go back and, I've talked to all kinds of experts who kind of say, like you're talking about cognitively, this is what you can do to sort of improve this with your spouse or improve this with your kids. But I do think about um, when you have that stuff kind of stuck in your body, how easy is it to process it sometimes? I mean, that's why I think what you do is so fascinating because I feel like, and I guess that's what I was kind of asking when, right, you see somebody hunched over or just their body stuck in positions that when we're sort of used to moving about life in a certain way, it's
Mm-hmm.
really what I've experienced is now, because I've been doing all kinds of stuff for my scoliosis over the years. And I
Yeah.
told you before we started this that I started postural rehabilitation. And this has been so great for me because it's helped me sort of just move different in space. And it's like my
Yeah.
brain has to operate different. Like, oh, this is where my shoulder should be. Oh, like, and so I wonder how that just would help us and help people in general kind of process emotions better when we can kind of be different in space.
Yeah, it's instead of talking to the mind all the time, if we just go in and start to learn how to move the body in ways that we've never have, whether it's just arching and curling. I do a gyrotonic practice, which moves in kind of three-dimensional system, and I also use Pilates as a method to help people connect with their core. But when we move in spirals and we start to kind of loosen up the joints, it takes us out of this. And then all of it, because we're just like, perhaps we're not coordinated enough, or how do you do that movement? And so our brain switches a different gear and we start to build that neuroplasticity, different patterning. And then all of a sudden, the teenager or the mid 20 something that I'm working with who's has severe depression, I have them in their body now and I can tell they're not thinking about it anymore. They're not. And so it's like, let me just get you in here. And it's not to say that, they won't go back to this, but it's just to turn on something else and to where they can feel their power. That is what I'm trying to connect them with. Depression is really low current. There's not a lot of energy flowing through there. So if I can start to get you to move and perhaps maybe even laugh, and because you can't move, because this person isn't coordinated, because they're in this small box and they're just like, I feel really weird moving. And you start to have them put their feet in straps and start to move and they're like, what am I doing? And it's awesome. You see something else being born
Hmm.
and it starts to lighten the load.
Hmm.
And perhaps the story comes out more, or they can understand what they went through. And ultimately, it's about helping them find their power. There's something with the core muscles that needs to be ignited and turned on, especially scoliosis is the same, because it seems as though it's really difficult to find those muscles. And when you do, it just connects you to your confidence and who you are and standing strong in who you are, believing in yourself and moving forward with whatever your dream, purpose, whatever that may be.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think too, like, and I think we're all guilty of this, like when, like you're saying, I was thinking about how you're talking about how like our heart can be kind of sore. And like if you're walking around with that all the time, I would imagine that like if you get in a fight with your spouse, that because that's still there, it's gonna be hard to kind of cognitively think like, okay, I can't react that way if you're kind of always carrying this pain, right? Like it's kind of when we're talking like
Right.
mind, body, soul connection, that's basically what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And if you have this like sore heart muscle, um, the workout program I did was get on the gyrotonic tower, and I was arching and curling and moving my rib cage. And you could just do this sitting on a stool or sitting on the edge of a chair, but just trying to move the rib cage because the ribs are the protectors of the heart. And oftentimes they get really tight and rigid and they can't move and it hurts, right? And then when someone says something to you that's hurtful, it's like, ugh, it's like putting a knife right in your chest and you get angry. And then we get mad that we respond. We get mad at ourselves that we're responding so angry and we don't know how to change that pattern. But if
Hmm.
we go in and change it physically, it seems like it metabolizes it, it changes it. We're more calm and that person, whatever they said to us, just doesn't hit us the same way.
Yeah. And I think too, like for a long time, I didn't understand like, oh, mind, body, soul connection. Like I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. And over the years, and I understand it a lot better. But for those people who are kind of thinking, that same thing, like what would you say to them in terms of the work that you do?
Yeah, it really is just making it conscious. It's really believing that there is a mind body soul connection, and when you put it all together, that is the healing. It's it sometimes I think it's easier for us. It's hard. Like we have the group of people that go to therapy and they're willing to sit down and talk, and we like talk to the brain. And that's traditionally what we've done a lot. But it seems weird to go to a physical therapist or a body worker because I just went through a divorce or I just lost my job or I lost a child or whatever it may be. But we have to kind of think in those different terms, or to an energy worker that understands the emotions and how to move those from your body. Um, because we definitely could benefit from both. And then we understand that it soothes our soul. That's kind of how it all goes together. And it's really just being open and curious and having that wonder, like, could this all be? And it just elevates. It's a lighter sensation. It's not as heavy. Um, and that's a lot of times the healing work that helps people pull out of darkness.
Do you see this kind of stuff getting more prominent in the future? Like not so niche maybe, but like more energy type work and this type of body work to help with anxiety and depression and all these things?
It surely has to. I have dedicated myself for the last like 6, 7 years to sitting with CEOs of major health insurance companies and um, people who own hospitals and being like, we've got to do this work. I mean, some of the healthcare insurance companies list energy medicine as a modality, but they're not doing it. I don't really understand. I think we're getting there though. We have it listed. So in time, I think the problem is it's so subjective. It's not objective. You can't measure, well, you could, we'll get there, but you can't measure like how much grief you have in your heart.
Mm,
You could, because you can look at the energy centers and there are different kinds of devices that can actually start to look at those things. We'll get there. I'm really excited. I think it's a really cool start of what's to come. I think it'll really help the mental health crisis. We have a major mental health crisis in our world, in our country, and addiction.
hmm.
And when we start to treat the body first from a mind, body, soul perspective, people will just feel so much more relieved.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. Yeah. And so, are there any resources that you would recommend? Like a book I read a while back, The Body Keeps the Score. That's a big one that I feel like
Yeah.
relates to what we're talking about.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
these types of resources. Do you have any others?
Yes. The Body Keeps the Score is great. I love How to Get the Love You Seek by Dr. Nicole LaPerla. She's a
Hmm.
holistic psychologist. She's really great because she helps you understand the emotional connections and how to relate that back to your childhood and how those patterns are really in adult life as well. Um, I love Gabor Mate.
Hmm.
He wrote, I have all these books on my shelf, The Myth of Normal,
Hmm.
but he is a huge advocate for the world of addiction and substance use disorder. So very helpful in connecting it to trauma. And so those are some of my favorites. If you want to get into the energy medicine world, my teacher is Carolyn Mace. She wrote Anatomy of the Spirit. So she's going to direct you more into the soul aspects and the physical aspects of things and how that's connected.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, Gina, is there anything else you want to say or add? Like, I love this stuff. So I could probably talk to you about it for a long
I know.
time.
I love it too. I think this was perfect and
Mhm.
I'm so excited. Like I said, I really do think that we are on the precipice of something really great and very holistic where a lot more people will feel heard and perhaps all the diagnoses and overuse of medications can all just go down and we can kind of really sink into the soul medicine, which is what we need. So.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, you know, kind of my goal at this podcast is like, okay, how can we feel better about ourselves? Because I think once we do, then we can have better relationships and then we all just kind of sit better in the world, right? That's, I think,
It
the goal.
is like
Yeah.
everyone's got this thing. I mean, you're doing this podcast, right? You were called to do that.
Hmm.
And it's something you've started. And, something speaks to everyone, and everyone's so different. When we're young, we kind of want to be like our friends, and it feels weird to be different. But yet, that's what I feel like I'm constantly doing when people have pain because there's purpose in that pain, and it's to help them find it. And it's, sometimes I don't know if I have this rising athlete in front of me who just has, all this pent up fear inside of them that they're trying to move through, and they're just going to be this, you know, amazing person. And it's just trying to help them connect with self. And when we love ourselves, then we're a better person out in the world to others.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Gina, this was so great. Thank you so much for doing
Yay.
this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.